From buzzing notifications to bright screens to the constant hum of everyday life, many of us feel overstimulated before we've even left the house. Today, we're exploring why modern life feels so noisy and the small, practical steps that can help us to turn down that constant hum. Welcome to Beyond Wellbeing. Brought to you by Allianz, I'm Dr. Oscar Duke. In this series, we explore the science of longevity, the power of mental wellness, and the everyday practices that can add life to your years. Today, we're talking about sensory overload, how it affects our hearing, vision, attention, and mental clarity, and how we can gently reduce the sensory noise many of us take for granted. Today, I'm joined by two brilliant guests. First, Professor Charles Spence, head of the Cross-Modal Research Laboratory at the University of Oxford, whose research explores how our senses interact and how better design can support calmer living. And alongside him, Kim To, ADHD coach and speaker, who brings lived experience and practical insight into how sensory overload can show up in everyday life. Charles, Kim, thanks both for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Charles, starting with you, can you tell me a little bit about what cross-modal research is? This is a concept that not everybody's going to have come across, I guess.
Yeah, it's a term for kind of the emerging understanding that the senses all talk to each other, that we have kind of separate senses on the outside, eyes and ears, nose, mouth, and skin. But when you start looking inside people's heads, then you find that all the senses are cross-talking kind of all the time. And so cross-modal is really just a term for those who study how one sense affects another one, how the loud noise outside might affect our perception of the temperature in here, being a cross-modal, how the lighting might change how loud my voice seems, might be cross-modal, and how people sort of deal with the sensory overload across all of their senses. And that requires some kind of cross-modal coordination to deal with the cornucopia of sensations and the overload that many of us seem to face.
This is intriguing. So overstimulation, I guess, comes to many of us from all different angles. How do we sort of define that sensory overstimulation? What's happening when we feel overstimulated?
So it's a term you find in the literature, sensory overload, going back to, 50s, 1960s, 70s. People were talking about it, sometimes in the context of marketing, but even then stores had too much music and too much perfume on the kind of the ground floor of the department stores, and too much bright lights. Yeah. So people have been talking about it for a long time. That said, it's kind of hard to define quite. We all know what we're talking about when we use the term, but how do you define it objectively? That's no one has, I don't think, really. It's not something you can necessarily objectively measure. Well, the sound is this loud, the lights are that bright, the temperature is this high, therefore you must be feeling sensory overload. No, it's probably based on individual differences. And so for those who are perhaps older and harder of hearing, then they might find the noisy bars giving them sensory overload because they can't really concentrate on one conversation amongst others. And there are others for who might have sort of multiple chemical sensitivities, it's called. I suppose if someone says, this environment is I'm getting too much sensory overload, it's too stimulating for me, then that's that. It is.
They are overloaded. Do we know, so you give that fascinating example of the lights might be too bright, therefore your voice might feel louder. Yeah. Do we know anything about what's happening in the brain? Because those are obviously different senses. Mm-hmm. Do we know how that interpretation leads to that feeling of change in the other sense?
People often talk about that we have sort of attention, or we have mental resources that we can kind of use to deal with stuff, to make decisions and to select some information amongst others. And that if we are in an environment where we find there's too much sensory input for us, then we'll use more of our resource and more of our attention to try and kind of blank out the stuff that's too much. Our mental resources can do a bit of the work, but if we're constantly in an environment where the music is too loud, then our resources will get exhausted and we won't be able to sort of cope with it. And for example, just before Christmas, either this year or last year. We did a study just looking at Christmas shopping, and had people with body monitors on with a heart rate, skin conductance, and sent them off to do their Christmas shop in a central London supermarket. Sort of half an hour, you need to get everything for a Christmas meal or Christmas day for a family.
Time.
Yeah. And just to see that their heart rates went up by something like 30% when they're doing this because of the noise, because of the queuing and the congestion, to an equivalent level as what you get in a sort of, when watching a scary horror movie or on a roller coaster.
Yeah,
these were the kind of increases.
Christmas shopping is
so there's this sort of physiological arousal then that is part of the consequence of trying to deal with not too much information, too much noise.
And is there a sort of primary source for where this overstimulation is coming from? It feels like our tech and our mobile phones get a lot of blame at the minute. Is that one of the major sources, do you think?
I think so. And I think maybe, people have for a long time talked about sensory overload. For me, it's more like a matter of sensory imbalance. But you can't really find many people out there who are saying, I'm having too much touch, or there's too many tastes, or there are too many smells for me. So we complain about too much overstimulation in the higher rational senses of hearing and vision, I think, because of technology. Technology can't really stimulate smell or touch or taste. And because we live mostly, 95% of our lives indoors? So you have people like Tiffany Field in the States who talks about, a generation of touch-hungry people. It is this sensory imbalance. And it is problematic because our emotional senses, like smell and touch and taste, that could have more direct connections to our emotional centers in the brain, are the ones that aren't being stimulated enough.
Can I jump in and say, as you were saying, I think one of the big reasons is we've developed an attention grabbing economy where, as everyone's got phones, everything is geared towards grabbing our attention. So if you think about things like TikTok, it's just so easy to grab our attention really easily and stay indoors rather than actually go out and play sports and have that contact. So I totally agree with what you're saying around the digital aspect. Definitely I can relate to that in terms of I go out and think everything digitally is trying to grab my attention, like marketing, sounds, music in shops, visuals. It's all trying to grab my attention. And none of my other senses are being stimulated, like you said, like touch, emotional connection. None of that is being stimulated. Most of what is being stimulated is sounds, my sight, and it's mostly digital led from my experience.
And I guess you're right, there's that sort of dearth of touch, but then equally you might speak to, thinking of infants, you might speak to a new parent who actually, they're touched out, they spend all day being climbed on or, infuriated perhaps by a child at times. And that gives that sort of oversensory stimulus as well, doesn't it? I guess if people are listening and thinking about things that they could change either within their home or their workplace that might sort of lead to the biggest return in terms of reducing this noise, not just in the auditory sense, but this sort of overstimulation, what sort of things can have a high impact and be a quick win for them, Charles?
I guess obviously just turning off the tech. I've never had a mobile phone in my life, so I kind of avoid it that way. But that's a bit of an extreme approach.
Yeah.
But I see for the students at college in Oxford now, we have to have special courses for digital detox. You can have a couple of hours without your technology.
Yes, your life is
and just concentrate. And it is possible.
Yeah.
They need hand-holding to get through that as an emotional attachment. But that would be one of the simplest things, I think. And then once you've done that, for me, I think it's so much about getting out into nature or nature stimulation. And in 2021, I wrote this book on sense hacking about how the power of our senses. And the biggest kind of insights for me that came out of reading all the literature was just how profoundly beneficial nature stimulation is to people. And that can be the sights of nature, the sounds of nature, even the smells or the feel, and go out and be sort of mindful and try and find that. I mean, both the natural light is important because many of us are light hungry as well in these sort of dark environments all day, perhaps without any access to natural light, especially in the dark northern climes like UK and New York. It's something like 10, 15% of the office workers in New York City suffer from light hunger in the winter, kind of a weak version of seasonal affective disorder. So I really think, try and get out and try and have some nature stimulation if you can. And if you can't get out, then even something as simple as having some sort of fragrance, natural fragrance to smell. So just like when you go to the dentist's, it's the smell of eugenol, the cloves, and suddenly you're getting tense, you're thinking about the drill that's about, and there's nothing intrinsically stressful about clove smell. It's just that's what they use in the fillings. And we've learned to associate that smell with stress, and hence that smell makes us stressed. And in the own home, for so many people, I suppose, were probably working from home and Zooming from home and having stressful meetings from home. And then they've finished their workday and they're still in the same room, still with the same smell. And so even there, you just, if you've had a stressful meeting at home or a stressful encounter, then simply changing the smell to something different. Doesn't matter what it is, preferably a nature smell, will elevate your mood, kind of like an olfactory reset.
And there's good research then to show the benefits of that outdoor switch.
I mean, it sort of goes back to the 1970s and 80s, and hospital patients who even have a view of nature out of their window recover better than those who have a view of a brick wall out of the window. And from there on, was it 10 minutes at lunchtime in the park has significant benefits on well-being. Even digital nature, so even something like, I think even the screensaver on one's computer often starts out with a beautiful natural scene from somewhere in the world, and staring at that for a few minutes can give you the nature effect.
And is this doing something chemically in the brain in terms of changing neurotransmitters, or do we know what the sort of biology is there?
It probably must be doing something in the brain. I'm not really that sort of psychologist. I was a bit, but yes, I mean, so people wonder, why should nature be so beneficial for us? And maybe it's just biophilia. We just love nature. Is one idea, or the other one is just like coming here today. You're on the train; it's very noisy, olfactory pollution, 100 decibels of rattling on the underground. Then you come out at King's Cross, and do I walk to the left of that person or the right? And there's a whole stream of people running, charging towards you, and you've got to use your attention every moment to figure out where to. So that really drains your resources. Whereas sort of the idea of being in nature is just, it's kind of passively fascinating. And it just gives your batteries a chance to recharge. So your sort of mental resources are sort of filling up through exposure to nature. And we find now that, it's from the studies, you get benefits from listening to birds and different benefits from listening to water sounds, waterfalls or fountains. I guess everyone would agree. Yeah, I can get it that nature makes me feel better, but we don't realize how much better it makes us feel according to the evidence. If we don't realize how much better we would feel, I'll just stay inside because it's a bit cold today.
So although we have those experiences when we're there, and we could report them if we were asked at that time, somehow we
don't recognize. We don't recognize how much beneficial. And it's only when you sort of objectively ping people and get the results when they're indoors or in the city versus in nature that you can see across different age groups, demographics, you name it.
And how we perceive things is clearly very important. Kim, bring you back in. Living with ADHD or neurodivergence, how does that impact on the way in which you or others might see the world?
Yeah, it's quite a vague question. Just to clarify, I have combined ADHD, diagnosed dyslexia, and suspected autism. So quite a range there. But I think the key thing I say, especially having combined ADHD and coaching my clients, is you're constantly living in a world where you're trying not to get overwhelmed daily. So our executive function is already challenged. Our ability to direct energy to attention, to motivate ourselves is already very difficult because we have a very low dopamine baseline. And so in a world where there's constant demands on our attention and time, so you can imagine office work, emails, right? So notifications, Slack, WhatsApp, this is just constantly grabbing our attention. And for someone with ADHD who has a baseline of very low dopamine, low, difficulty allocating that attention efficiently, it becomes very overwhelming. And that's just mental stimulation, right? Then we talk about sensory stimulation, stepping out the door in London. So I live in London, and I've lived in London, was growing up in London, and all I've experienced is stimulation, right? Like I constantly listen to police sirens, right? Like during the night, even I go on the tube, it's super noisy, but I can't not be involved in that society because that's where I live. But I just know it's very overstimulating. And for someone who has neurodiversity, a lot of us would experience overstimulation. You hear that word on a daily basis because that is our experience. We are very sensitive to environmental stimuli.
And what, for you, I guess, are the sort of physical effects of that? How does that manifest itself?
Yeah, very good question. So I can talk on behalf of myself, but I would say it's very common amongst people who are more sensitive, have a sensitive nervous system. When I feel overstimulated, it's as if my body my brain can't process more information. So I get to a point where maybe I'm on the tube, it's really noisy, I'm smelling someone's perfume or body odor, and then there's bright lights, and then there's sounds, and then I'm hearing 10 different conversations in different languages, and everything is magnified in my brain. Now you can imagine that's very overwhelming, but I can't get out of this train. I need to sit there still, right?
You're there, yeah.
So my brain is literally shutting down because it's basically saying to myself, you're overstimulated, you're overwhelmed. And then I'm sitting there and I actually can't make a decision on what I need to do because I'm already very distracted by all the stimulation around me. So I think mentally, my brain shuts down, and physically, you can start feeling distress. So all the signs of stress. So, sweaty palms, racing heart. So there's a physical element and a mental element of complete mental almost shutdown.
Would you get that as well? I'm curious if you're out in nature, I don't know, in the forest, and it's blowing a gale, and there are lots of scents of flowers and things. Could that?
Very, very interesting question. Yeah, so the answer is not to that extent, because it actually, I've never been on a hike and felt, oh God, I'm overstimulated. It's always my experience has always been in, I guess, urban settings where I feel like I don't have control over a lot of factors coming at once. But I guess when you're on a hike, you kind of expect that stimulation, right? It's almost pre-planned.
As is if you go on the underground, you must know, one knows it's going to be horrible and smelly and noisy. And
I agree, but I think it's different with nature. It doesn't feel as intense. It doesn't feel as my brain is shutting down, overwhelming sort of thing.
Our brain has, you evolved from a much more natural place, haven't we? From living outside, being cavemen and women in the early days, to now. That presumably has a significant impact as well. We're sort of almost hardwired to find nature that more relaxing space.
I agree.
And one of the most fascinating studies I came across in writing the sense hacking was about in the States, they'd got people in every state, from Texas, which is probably the hottest, to Alaska, which is probably the coldest. And they'd ask them, homeowners, what do you set your thermostat to and the humidity level in your homes? And they found, regardless of the state or the ambient temperature, everyone set their thermostat and humidity to the same level, give or take a fraction. And then when they looked around global weather maps to say where in the world is closest to the temperature and humidity we set for our own homes, it's in the Ethiopian highlands where supposedly we evolved.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we are, still, our thermostats have not changed that much.
No. And if that's true for temperature, then you think, I don't know, of the other senses as well, maybe. We didn't evolve for straight lines and walls and for things that are all probably so close to us, whereas in natural environments, maybe there's more depth of field.
Well, I think our brain is, like the question you asked was so good. I genuinely have never heard a client of mine or myself feel overwhelmed in nature. I think we've evolved to deal with whatever's coming at us in nature, whilst I feel like in urban settings, there's no regulation skills for that. There's no, I guess our brain just hasn't evolved to that point where, we're like so prepared for all that stimulation. So I actually feel very calm in nature, whether there's gales or whatever, rainy weather, I actually feel absolutely fine. So it's mostly just getting on with day-to-day life that feels very difficult. So you raise a really good point there.
Kim, I wonder, Charles talking about that idea that you're going into one of those environments, you're going on the tube, you might be threatened by that sensory overload.
Yeah.
What sort of strategies do you have? One would be just to completely avoid it, which I suppose for some people, if they're very disabled by that feeling, may have to do that in certain circumstances. But if you were giving advice to somebody, one of your clients, say, what sort of tips and tricks are there that people can use to help them with managing that overwhelm?
Sure. So really good point is that you've got to map out the expectations of what this could be like in terms of the stimulation. Absolutely. If you live in a place where you're able to drive to work and you don't find that stimulating versus taking the tube, those are options. But my bag has all sorts of things. It's got fidget toys, it's got AirPods, noise cancelling headphones, loops, it's got a magazine in there. So I always say to clients, have a little care bag where you have anything in there that you could pull out and constantly just, maybe distract yourself on the tube if you need to. So depending on my mood on the day, if I feel like I want to hold something, soft that can distract me from all the stimulation around me, I'd do that. I'd also brought sunglasses one time because the lighting on the tube was so bright. So I wore sunglasses throughout the whole trip, for example. Other things like listening to calming music, that could really help. Going during off-peak times is really important if you can negotiate that flexibility with your workplace. Even just getting a cap, and also there's
nose plugs. Do you ever
when
you go for swimming to stop the body odor?
Yeah, I think I'd probably be stared at, but that would be very nice. But one tip also is if you wear your sunflower lanyard, so it signals invisible disability, and that could be really helpful because I remember one time I felt really overstimulated on the tube and I actually ran out and was going to throw up, and I found someone. I was like, I feel really ill. I really need to go somewhere because of the stimulation. And he directed me to a hidden toilet in the tube. And I didn't know tubes had toilets. Of course they did, but they don't let that be open to the public. So I think just signaling that you have an invisible disability, i.e. ADHD, autism, etc., that could give you more access to support.
And it's interesting that you're maybe stimulating one sense to help you cope with another.
Yes.
Charles, is that something that fits with a lot of the research that you do and see?
Yeah. Maybe the sense that you stimulate, then you have control over it. Whereas this other stuff that's coming in, you have no control. Mm-hmm. And so sort of being in control of your experience makes it more manageable. And maybe there's a shift towards more, if it's the things that you're feeling, then to the more emotional senses. Is very important. Away from those digital distractions or the 10 languages being spoken. I'm just thinking, I guess on trains now, I guess they are overland trains are much better because they have quiet carriages. Why don't they have one of those on the underground?
Yeah.
Very good point.
And the squeaky rails.
Yeah.
And they might have to work on that.
Although when it looks at it, it's something like over 100 decibels in many of the London Underground lines. It's so loud, it's damaging your hearing.
Yeah. Sometimes your headphones give you an alert, don't they, when you're on a tube train?
And with and the kind of the volatile chemicals that come off the tracks or from those sort of toxic. So you really wouldn't want to go down there at all if you could avoid it. But most of us can't.
Well, we thought... accepting that we're in the presence of great researchers from the University of Oxford, we thought that we'd do a little study to see what's going on. So we asked one willing volunteer to change up some of their habits to see if it helps with some of their feelings of overstimulation. So Joe travels to work regularly on the train, will often listen to music and podcasts on their journey through their headphones, normally for the entire journey. So we suggested they change this up. Firstly, replace their podcasts with the sounds of nature, which is exactly what you've been talking about, specifically bird song and water. And then to take a break in the middle of the day to be in nature without headphones or a screen or any other distraction. So shall we have a listen to how Joe got on?
Yes.
I've been travelling into work today on the train and then the London Underground, and usually I'd have headphones on with some music on and potentially some podcasts as well, mixing it up, but always headphones on pretty much from the moment I sit down. And during the change for the tube, I had to carry quite heavy bags up some stairs, and I was feeling pretty out of breath, a bit hot when I sat down on the tube, and I put on some nature sounds, some bird song, which was very lovely, and some waterfalls, and I just closed my eyes for 2 or 3 minutes, and I have to say I felt my breathing slow down, and I arrived at my stop an awful lot calmer than when I got up those stairs. So I'm going to do it again later on the way home. I had a break this morning and took myself out to a sort of natural space in the middle of the city, and I put my phone away and I didn't take it out and I didn't look at it, and I just sat and sort of looked around, and I listened to the birds in the trees, and I listened to what was going on, and I reckon I was there for about 15, 20 minutes with nothing actually to do, nothing to distract me. I was just watching, listening. And I've come back in the afternoon feeling a little bit more productive, feeling like I had a proper break, weirdly. I didn't miss scrolling on the screen. So I'm going to do that again for sure, going and sitting outside on a sort of lunch break and just being. In terms of energy levels, I was probably at a 6 before I did my break, and coming back I did feel more productive. I definitely felt like I had more energy, like I'd rested. So I'd say it's gone up to an 8. Before I did the break, I think my stress level was around 5, 6. I'm going to say that's dropped to a 4 and feeling much less overwhelmed by it all. And the word I would use is being present, being connected, just being in a space. And yeah, it was really eye-opening actually, and it didn't take much. So I'm going to build this into my routine now.
So what were your thoughts, Charles? Should we start with you? Does it fit with what you see and expected?
I'd say it was eye-opening. I might say it might be ear-opening as well.
Very good. Yeah.
And does fit. Probably about a couple of years ago now, we did a study actually on computers. Or had commuted in and out of work on a train in some big city, and we had a 60 of them, and over a course of a 1-hour commute, we had 20 of them just sitting there quietly. We had 20 of them listening to their usual podcasts or music downloads, whatever it was they'd normally do, and then another 20 we had this specially composed soundscapes of sort of. To match the sort of the repetitive rhythm of the train on the tracks, but with waterfall sounds and bird song, just like was described here, and got people to say, how were you feeling before we started the commute? How do you feel after you finished the commute? And that showed that the nature soundscapes really helped improve people's well-being compared to the other things they might be doing. And what's more, for me, just walking up and down the train carriage as the study was going on, you could just see people sort of beatific with their eyes closed, smiling, happy, tranquil, and you could tell that was they were in the nature soundscape condition. And just to have it so obvious,
you had the results before you even collected the data. Yeah.
But again, none of us sort of realise ourselves how much better we feel, unless it's sort of pointed out to us, and hence that's why we're not all listening to nature soundscapes all the time, as perhaps we should be.
Mm.
And Kim, have you ever tried this sort of strategy of listening to the sounds of nature rather than the noisy environment in whichever city you might find yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I say to myself and clients is when you're overstimulated, listening to sound of nature, I think automatically gives you a sense of calm. Obviously, pick the correct one. Some people find certain sounds overstimulating. Like I really like the sound of waves. Some people might not. And actually, what we listened to when the volunteer closed their eyes and visualized the nature, for me, that reminded me of visualization techniques that I tell my clients about, which is it helps you stimulate parts of the brain that uses the same neural pathways as sight, right? So once you close your eyes and imagine the nature and actually having the sensory input of sound, it really helps the disconnection from actually what's happening around you. So I have used it quite a bit. In terms of the tube, the trains, I don't really use it there because I find it very hard to have a bit of a corner space to go and close my eyes. I wouldn't do that. But I have used nature sounds when I'm getting ready to sleep, for example. So I have a very overactive mind, and a lot of people with ADHD experience huge difficulties getting ready for bed because our brain is just really overstimulated. And something I always do is listen to nature sounds before I sleep to help calm my brain down and get ready to feel safe to sleep.
Fascinating stuff. If you could offer one tip to listeners who are struggling with the sensation of sensory overload, whether that be in a place that's, difficult to avoid, that an open plan office or somewhere like travel, what would be the sort of number one piece of advice, Charles, that you could pass on to them?
Turn off the technology.
Get rid of that technology and get
if you're allowed
outside.
to. Maybe your boss won't let you.
Yeah. And in that sort of open plan environment, if you're living with neurodiversity of any sort, that can be really challenging. What sort of options are there for people?
Yeah. So what I say to clients is find what you can control, because I find that there's a sense of nature, but it's also a sense of we want something we can control in this environment that feels so uncontrollable. So what can you control? Now, whether that's being able to literally get up and walk to a more quieter space in the open plan office, do that. Whether that's actually getting up and going to a window and actually looking outside and, just pointing things out like that's a tree, that's the clouds. That really helps just disconnect. And the other thing I always say to clients is just walk around. And if you don't have nature, just look at the plants, really look at the detail of the plants. Hopefully most offices have plants now in order to help you feel a certain way. But yeah, have a plant, grow an indoor plant and really
find some indoor nature.
Yeah, find some indoor nature, right? And if worse comes to worse, put a poster up of some nature, where you went, somewhere that you went that really stimulates a sense of adventure, fun, safety. So there are loads of things you can control, even though it might feel like the environment is uncontrollable. And always have noise cancelling headphones. Very helpful. I say that as a standard must have for anyone who's neurodivergent.
It's extraordinary, really, isn't it? How much, by mankind's intervention, we have moved away from the very world in which we evolved and are causing this huge amounts of sensory stress and overload.
And in part, I think I had a few architecture conferences over the last year or two, and they're increasingly using virtual reality to model what buildings are going to look like and stuff. And there again, they can only sort of model visually what it's going to look like. They can't really get a modeling of what it's going to feel like in terms of thermal or olfactory, because they can't model it and they can't tell their clients or show it, illustrate it before they've actually built it. All these other more emotional senses kind of get neglected, and just we'll give you something that looks beautiful, because that's what we can demonstrate in pictures and VR.
Maybe the AI of the future will enable us to smell the environments that we're creating for future generations.
And it is, isn't it? That even the things that we don't think about. So we got funded for a project with architects and legal scholars about sort of thermal justice, and kind of pretty warm in here. It's pretty warm in the tube. It's pretty warm on the train today. Can we control that? Because that's another kind of sensory overstimulation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're in a really, really hot environment, but you can't, our new building, we can't open the windows because it's all cleverly controlled. And so again, we have no control of that, the thermal aspects, but no one really thinks about the temperature or humidity when they're designing spaces. And there are many people who are in sort of council houses and flats around the country who have absolutely no control over their heating or their thermal comfort.
Yeah,
absolutely none.
Centrally regulated.
And that lack of control over something most people don't think about, again, does cause great stress. And when in the summertime, if it's it's 35 degrees with global warming, and you can't open the windows, and these buildings, these apartments weren't designed to weren't designed for such hot weather, and have no means of changing it or adapting. It's just you have to live with it. And it's so hot, suffocating, you can't even, they really suffer.
And it becomes really very difficult indeed. Such valuable insights there from both Charles and Kim from the research side, and also the lived experience of that sense of overstimulation on potentially a daily basis. Some of the most important factors were the value of nature, going back to our roots, the environments in which we evolved, getting outdoors, or even bringing the indoors inside if it's not possible to escape that busy open plan office, for example. And that awareness of how all of our senses can interact to contribute to the feeling of overstimulation. A light being too bright might actually make us feel like the noise is too much, never mind the Christmas shopping. And finally, being aware of what you can control to really help to regulate and distract from those senses, which inevitably in our busy world might be overstimulating us. Professor Charles Spence and Kim To, thank you both for sharing your insight and wisdom today. And thank you also for listening to this episode of Beyond Wellbeing. I hope it's helped you find a quieter, calmer moment in a very noisy world. Next time, we're exploring weight. What happy weight really means, how to lose weight healthily and sustainably. But for now, it's bye from me.